All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As Henrietta said, my name is Taylor Jasper. I'm the Susan and Rob White Assistant Curator of Visual Arts here at the Walker and the Organizing Curator of Kandis Williams' Surface. I'm thrilled to welcome y'all this evening to the opening day program for the exhibition, featuring a dialogue between Kandis and fellow artist Tomashi Jackson. A Surface is Kandis's first institutional survey, presenting more than 50 works across collage, painting, sculpture, video, and performance from the past decade. The show unfolds across 4 thematic sections that reflect her sustained engagement with the politics of labor, representation, and the body. At its core, this exhibition is anchored in Kandis's approach to the surface, not as a passive site of representation, but as a dynamic space of resistance, critique, and transformation. For her, collage is more than a technique, it's method, epistemology, and rupture. A Surface is an exhibition about how images work and how they can be worked against. It's about what it means to make something out of fragments, to reframe and refuse, and to assert presence where absence was once scripted. So this evening's talk will be a dialogue between Kandis and Tomashi, and then we'll open for questions at the end. If any arise during the talk, please write them on the note cards that you hopefully received at the door. I'd also like to remind you that the galleries and the shop, if you'd like to pick up the catalog, will be open after the talk, so please go see the show. Thank y'all so much, and I'll welcome Kandis and Tomashi to the stage.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Oh, it's beautiful. I'm going to take a picture. Okay, hi, Kandis.
Hi, Tomashi.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's perfect.
Thank you
It's
so
perfect.
much. Thank you, Taylor, for her curation and the layout of the space. I feel like it couldn't be designed better as an exhibition. I'm so grateful.
Here, why don't you control this?
Okay.
You push the green button, and it'll just go forward. Wait, but before you do, go back. But first, I want to thank you for bringing me here to be with you during this special time, this extraordinary, breathtaking triumph of a show. It's beautiful.
Thank you so much.
It's so beautiful.
Aw.
Okay.
Y'all gonna make me cry in public, please stop.
Okay. So yeah, it's beautiful, it's perfect, but I have to ask for myself, Kandis, why did you ask me to come here?
You know, it's funny, I was thinking about it actually, and maybe we should read Tomashi's bio.
Oh yeah, I do have one of those.
Yeah. So we decided not to read the bios, but maybe I'll read Tomashi's bio. Does that make sense? Okay. Because I do think you need a bit of an introduction.
Okay.
Because y'all don't know her like I know her.
Whatever you say. Thank you, curator.
A curator, a friend, a constant resource, Taylor Jaspers. Give it up. Okay, so Tomashi Jackson, born 1980 in Houston, Texas. I met her in Cooper Union in about 2006. Combines practices of painting, printmaking, and sculpture with archival research in areas of public infrastructure and policy. Jackson's work was included in the 2019 Whitney Biennial and has been exhibited at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York, High Museum Atlanta, Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art, and the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art, among others. Solo exhibitions include Across the Universe, organized by the Museum of Contemporary Art, Denver, 2003, and traveling to multiple venues through 2006, Slow Jams, at the Neuberger Museum of Art, Purchase, New York, 2022, and the Land Claim at the Parrish Art Museum, Watermill, New York, in 2021. Her solo work is held in collections such as the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art, the Carnegie Institute, Pittsburgh, the Perez Art Museum, Miami, amongst others. And she lives and works in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So y'all know that's the basics on Tomashi, but I invited you because of a conversation that I don't think you probably even remember that we had when you came to visit me in Berlin when I was like, because after me and Tomashi went to art school, and I decided very actively not to pursue a career in art after art school. And I bartended in clubs for about 10 years in Berlin. And so Tomashi came to visit me in Berlin, and we were outside, and I had to like clean up the glass and bottles from the street and kick people inside so the neighbors wouldn't complain. And we sat outside on the curb, and she was like, "This is what you're doing." Okay. And we had this really brief conversation, but you were like, "There's just so much more to do." And I'm a very stubborn person. I do what I want to do. So often it's not even freedom. It's whatever when it's pathological demand avoidance or something. But the way she put it wasn't a demand, right? It opened up a place, I think, in me where I was like, oh, I have resources, I have options, I have stores, right? That I'm not maybe, that I'm not using. And it sat with me in ways that like people, friends, parents, whatever, mentors trying to get me to go to grad school for, 20 plus years had not, or however long after school had not. And while I didn't, choose the grad school path, I did start to commit myself more to my practice, which had always kind of stayed present, but which I wasn't giving form. I wasn't giving it form. I wasn't giving it commitment. I wasn't giving it space inside of my everyday. And so you kind of put me back on that track in a way. So that's why I invited you here, because I'd like for you to see where we are 10 years later.
I see it. I sure do see it. Okay. Well, thank you for that. We should get going. We only have so much time together. So we talked this morning about work, and where we really. Because our time is so brief and the work is so robust and the bibliography is so generous, we could draw upon many anchors and have a riveting, exciting time being lost in that. But we did settle on the plants that you wanted to unpack the plants. So we're art school girls from way, way back, like public arts high school type people. God bless the access to the visual arts and the humanities and a rigorous nature in dedicated learning environments and in our public institutions, because we're products of that from two different sides of the country. So we wanted to use this time to have a crit. So we're going to talk about whatever Kandis wants to talk about, and ultimately end up at the plants and the origins of that work and how that blossoms into the performance work, the directorial work, and the evolution of the compositional space in collaboration with others, and how that continues to be an outgrowth of your teaching pedagogy. Okay? So we'll start. She says we're starting here. We're starting here. I'm so glad we're starting here. So this is a diptych, but its second half is not in the show because it lives so far away now. Do you want to tell us about this work?
What do you think about it first? I mean, since we did meet in art school, and the color theory is also a lot of Tomashi's work deals with interactions of color theory. So I'm curious what you think of how color is used in the work.
I mean, I understand in my work and in my existence, I understand color to be chromatic and social. There are fewer bodies that have, there are fewer human bodies in the modern era that have absorbed so much of that violent interaction, interior and through the external gaze, on the world stage. There are fewer people who've endured that as intensely as Michael Jackson did. So it's, I didn't bother wearing any makeup or lining my eyes because, it's just, it's very loving. For me, it's a great place to start, right? So it's a great place to start with a grounding in Interaction of Color by Joseph Albers, published in 1963. Am I right? Or was that 63, right?
I think it's even earlier, 61.
No. Am I right? No, it's either older or that. So I think, because I've talked about this a lot, but all of us who learn art after that, the studio in the school, we can start, for me it also starts with the National Foundation for the Arts and Humanities Act of 1965. That I should read that to you, but that asserts and affirms that the arts and humanities are necessary for the evolution, the natural progression of an advanced society, and that in order for it's imperative for the arts and humanities to be accessible through education for developing people in this country to be able to understand their past, their present, and their future, and to not be unthinking servants of the technologies that they build. And that the sciences and technologies cannot be the only place that is upheld as the place of winners or whatever. That cannot be the only place where meaningful investment happens, right? So we emerge after that in public and private schools. And so there's the interaction of color as a teaching tool. Joseph Albers escapes Nazism, the Bauhaus crumbles. He and his wife and many others escape and come to the United States and embed themselves in teaching institutions to teach people, sometimes illegally, like teaching black students at Black Mountain College, for example. He eventually ends up at Yale University, which has an art department, but among the colonial, the parasitic, like our architecturally parasitic colonial first schools, because they become forts of the violence of the extermination of the native peoples and the kidnapping of African peoples to build them and to support their plantations. Among those schools, Yale has the oldest art program that is dedicated to visual art. So he arrives there and he turns it out. He completely turns it out. And he identifies young artists who come from our school, from Cooper Union, and he starts turning it into a contemporary art program. He develops the interaction of color with students like Robert Reed, the longest tenured, first black faculty there and longest tenured faculty there, who actually make these prints. But these, the homage to the square that Kandis is drawing upon here, he made those by hand. He didn't tape them off. It's all freehand, tight squares. The Joseph and Ani Albers Foundation stewards them now in Bethany, Connecticut, if any of y'all get out there. It's a wonderful place to visit. So you're immediately jumping, thighs deep into the history of art education and of seeing that ends up influencing us well before we get to college. That teaching methodology of form follows function. I now recognize it in my arts education in my elementary magnet school for visual and performing arts. I now understand how all those people were dealing with us. As the doors start to open, as the fight for educational access has happened, and the doors are actually starting to close, but we don't know that. So we have arts educators who are starting to tell us we can go to art school, that there's an arts high school for someone like you, you're talented, you can do something with that. Whereas the generation before us, my auntie, who was also a great painter when she was a child, figured she would never make money at it, and so she gave it up. So a lot of the people who came before us, who end up autodidacts or the gifts just die, they didn't have the encouragement that we had but by the time we are on the ground, this is actually being used as an educational tool all over the country. So when we get to college, we recognize it, our sensibilities recognize it, but the formal language that is sometimes used as a tool to make us feel like we don't belong in a place we're introduced to that too. So what I appreciate about this work is the reclamation of this as your education, as a product of your educational experience, not an assignment that was imposed upon you to prove that you deserve to be somewhere. But it's claimed now in your adulthood, this is 2019, as a part of your evolutionary language of color at its basic. And then on top of that, merged into that, is a part of your evolutionary understanding of color and space that for us as Black people is basic. It's Michael Jackson before and it's Michael Jackson after.
That's Great. Moving on. Oh yeah, this is a work that's actually not in the show, but Josh Johnson and I worked on this piece called Eurydice for about 2021, I guess, is the culmination year, but I feel like it really started with Affect Network Territory in 2015. So me and Josh both knew each other in Germany from the German art scene, from dance work and dramaturgy work there. But when we got to LA, the just rash of violence against Black people, the recordings, the viral recordings of police shootings, this kind of uncanny social choreography of people witnessing murder and then reposting or recapitulating, or that took both of us really, it really hit both of us hard. And so we started developing a movement language together, in which we would we would reenact, sort of, or not even reenact, but we would play with these movements of running, chasing, being contorted into and out of place. Who's chasing, who's watching, who's recording, the surveillance aspect of almost kind of an affectionate overseeing, but also of a distanced shock or horror, right? And so this piece actually is one of the first pieces that we did together, where the gallery starts off completely dark, and I planted one person Josh did a choreography inside of these black smoked mirrors. That was a lot of our movement language of running and chasing, falling, projecting, hiding, being seen, making himself unseeable. And so the one person with the light, with the camera phone light, starts following him sort of casually, not very theatrically, but by the end of the performance, everyone is, the room is bright. And so it was a really interesting collective sort of language, and I think, and especially in terms of working with dance and working with dancers, Josh really made, or Josh's particular archive, right? He's an Ailey dancer, going back to this interaction of color, right? He's an Ailey dancer, he's a Forsyth dancer, so he has these two extreme archives, one of like a very extremely lyrical archive, and then another archive that's extremely technically succinct and rigid and angular. And he moves, beautifully in between those concepts. And so seeing a lot of the ways that people follow him and follow him through space, the engagement with his body, really helped me process moving back to America in 2016. But also I think this filmic language, why it keeps resonating, is because there are so many gestures inside of it that even in small glitches or, movements, you really see, you see them profoundly as what they are, as movements that take life, or as the moment before life is taken, or that life is deemed worthy of being recorded or granted, or the glitch and the repost. So that's a lot of what we took into Eurydice. So I'm sort of curious, you said when we were talking a little bit that the video made you feel like you were there. So
yeah, well, the presentation of the work, the presentation of the other works that happen with Josh that are in the space, like an open book, a single surface or dual surface open book. Well, first thing, before I forget, we passed out to everyone note cards and golf pencils for a reason, because we want you to be able to have access to material to write down your thoughts and your questions as they evolve through this conversation. It's going to be easy to forget, what rises at one moment as we move to another work that's going to rise again. It's going to rise again. It's going to keep rising. So I want to encourage you to write or to draw any thoughts that you have as they arise, and then come Q&A time, when we have time at the end, we're going to collect them from you, and then the artist is going to choose which one she wants to talk about with the time that we have. And then any ones that we can't get to, we will then have an archive for Kandis and the Walker to interact with you all via social media if they choose to answer them continuously, okay? So there's that. Can you go back to the video?
So I invited this one?
Can you go back to the video? So I have a couple of questions. In the way that you're describing, I have two questions for all of us in the audience, so as not to presume that we all know the shorthand of dance pedagogy. But
I don't know dance pedagogy.
I mean, okay.
I didn't train. I've never trained.
But you're working with this. There's language here that I want to open up for all of us. But I also want to acknowledge that the way that you're talking about the formalism, the formal characteristics of his gestures and movement, and the feeling, what you both identified as you came back from Germany, which is funny, because after I saw you, I came back from Germany. I was in Germany because I was traveling with Otto Pina and Elizabeth Goldring as their assistant, and that's why I was like, however many, I don't know what, the names of the things that you all call streets in German.
Strassen.
Yeah, the Strasse. Yeah, I was however many Strassen away to be able to walk to you in the middle of the night, and interaction of color. So interaction of color, a color is whatever we think it is, not because of what it is, but because of the color nearest its edge. So it's not about emotion, actually. It's not about emotion. It's not about imposed meaning. It's about the optical illusions that occur when one thing meets another thing, when a blue meets the right orange and creates the illusion of a dark line at their border, but is not actually there. But our eyes see it. It's a compulsive. It's not something that we can control. So there are these. So we learn these things as people who are obsessed with visual art and visual language about, like, how do we see? What are we actually seeing? How do we participate in making imagery that other people will see? So there's a beautiful freedom in that. And so the way that you're describing his relationship to movement reminds me of that. It's what makes discipline so beautiful. It's what makes access to learning disciplinarily so crucial across the conservatory. So what is an Ailey dancer and what is a Forsyth dancer is what I wanted to ask.
Okay. Alvin Ailey was a choreographer who's also very represented in the show, an African-American choreographer who, and this is actually a question, not even a question, but something I think is important to bring into how I see performance and how I'm thinking about performance in terms of, because we talk so much about institutional pedagogy so far. Michael Jackson, Alvin Ailey, so many of the like the Horton movements, so many of the choreographers that I use are a part of, and I consider myself as well a part of, a social dance practice, right? So, like, even though I'm not the best dancer, growing up in Baltimore, social dance is a big part of how we see each other, who can dance, how dancers respond to events, how dancers respond to parts of movement, times of the season, times of life. So, like, especially couple forms. I think there has been a large ethnographic erasure of Afro couple forms and couple dance, along with, so much of our ritual dance and dance that's not supposed to be necessarily moving anything in audience, but in spirit and in self. And so I see also this extreme minstrel performance, right, that Michael Jackson comes out of, and as an interaction of color and an interaction of, and so I think we have to think about the supportive pedagogical institutions, but then also sites of learning, languages of seeing that never were and still are excluded from institutions. And so, like, I feel like, especially, this brings me to Forsyth. Bill Forsyth is a choreographer who's, I'm not even sure where Bill is from, so y'all should Google him. But his movement repertoire is considered, like, extremely hyper-technical. And Roderick was a Forsyth dancer when I first met them. When I first met him and Josh. So I don't want to go too much into that because their notation is not my notation. And so when me and Josh build dances together, we don't talk about Ailey or Forsyth because we don't talk about theater. We actually try to bring social dance and a lot more of the language. Like, for instance, right here, so a lot of these movements are really, like, he's driving, he's pulling over, he's getting out of cars, he's falling, he's being shot, he's running. These are movements where the discipline, for sure, of a lot of those trainings are coming through. But I think what you're seeing is that he can stitch, right? He can stitch a second of his body into another second of his movement. And that's that hyper training. But it also is a side of trauma where I think the freedom that you're seeing is the willingness, and in the context of my work especially, Josh can let go. And he lets go because we build architecturally, spaces where he can hide, where he can catch his breath, where he can not perform virtuosity, where he can where he can breathe, where he can sleep, where he can, or not even sleep, he wouldn't do that, but where he can shut his eyes. And a lot of the ways that we talk through dance is like, I'm like, okay, if you get caught in a corner and people are crowding you, do a social dance out. So, electric slide out. If you need to Dougie to get out of a crowd, stare them down, duke it out. We talk in these very African American body movement ways, where I'm like, stare them down, mean mug them, you know what I mean? That's the facial movement. And so it's not necessarily that I want to privilege Forsyth language or even a ballet language. You probably won't hear me say plie more than once, because I do feel like those forms are, in many ways too, like that Bauhaus pedagogy, right? They hang on trauma, and they hang on a kind of erasure of those vernacular gestures and a lot of that vernacular site of knowledge, and instead it turns it into sort of the court of function. And so I think a lot of the time I work with dancers, it's about bringing where dance lays in their body, not necessarily where they're trained to process audience engagement with dance. And I also feel like in terms of movement, like this is Josh, this is Josh, this is Josh. Do you know what I mean? This is Lena. This is another dancer that I think in terms of the opacification of a lot of that training, and then the making transparent how that training has maybe also produced bodies that can't sustain, right, outside of being dictated or not even coerced, but dictated. And so as I'm a kind of undirector in a weird way when I work with dance. I can set scenes and build the worlds and the sort of spaces around. But like for instance, this is Lena Varga, who was one of the first performers I got to work with around the plants. We're circling into the plants. And this choreography was amazing because she took Mary Wigman's Hexentanz into this super explosive just opportunity to, again, like let loose, right? To like not to let her training fall away, and to really implicate the audience. So Lena was amazing. She did this entire piece solo. This is a solo of her. It goes from Mary Wigman's Hexentanz into basically I showed her sorority stomp. So it goes into like from Hexentanz into something like an Alpha Kappa Alpha sway, and on a Peruvian woman's body, indigenous Peruvian woman's body. And I gave her one prop, which was the mirror, and so I asked her to catch the gaze wherever she could. And yeah, this was one of them. Still, I mean, obviously resources, I didn't have so many there. This was Kevin's Space in Vienna, so shout out to them for providing that opportunity outside of institutions. But I think it's also important to say, like this is my first museum show as an artist. I think for the last 10 years too, I've been showing primarily in squats and off spaces, like artist-run spaces. This is such. And while those spaces don't have resources, they're, I think extremely vital, and will be even more vital in the coming years as we watch institutions.
Well, it begs the question, what is the nature of institutionality? What does one consider institutionally authoritative? Because there's what I'm listening to you. What is, okay, so how we see each other, how we're seen. What is institutionality? What is it? Who gets access? Who gets to build and declare institutional authority? The ability to stitch movement into specific time and space. But what is the historic exclusion of Black and Indigenous people from institutional access to the arts and humanities? And then what are the institutions created by Black and Indigenous people, Black and Indigenous communities in naturally occurring proximity to each other? And where are opportunities? So like we get to, the work, the show pushes toward power. The work in the show, watching you grow as an artist over all of these years through this show. It builds and builds and builds to repossession of self. It says it right there on the wall. Movement as power. Help me.
Oh yeah, mapping movement.
Mapping movement through power. So
that's Taylor Jaspers, right?
Hey, Taylor.
Can't take credit for that. No.
Yeah, but I would consider that the notion of institutionality is actually ours to invest in and declare. That at some point, we actually are. We have the potential to be the greatest investors, and that the space in Kevin's space is no less significant or important because of a lack of like fiscal support at that time, but that the space was there for you and others to explore. So something that really moves me about seeing the performance work, besides the FOMO, the terrible FOMO, I'm like, where was I? I should have been in Berlin. I should have been in Los Angeles. But and you asked me this earlier, the openness of the work, kind of like Lena's legs in that one point. There are many moments in the show that actually do that. It's so generous. It's so trusting. You're trusting us all with a lot. You're opening up. And so like literally the physical surfaces in that big room open up and then implicate the figure. It implicates my figure with its largeness because projection shows up in multiple ways. Collage shows up in multiple ways throughout the show. The carousel projections, I'm doing too much. But it's just the way that light, painting is about light, photography is about light. It's the language of light. Color is about light. We think we're seeing color, we're actually just seeing light. And the cones in our eyes are like machining perception.
And what's the opposite of light? Darkness.
So, you and Taylor are playing with that throughout this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful presentation. But those surfaces where the performances are happening, it makes me feel like I could have been there. There's FOMO for sure, but the way that the presentation's happening, because you could have put those on screens or monitors or something like that, and the way you bring it into the space as sculpture, Nikki Logis, the way you bring it into the space as sculpture, as like or who else comes to mind? Christopher Wilmarth. I'll give it to Christopher Wilmarth and Jack Whitten. Like the way that a sculpture can affirm its position in the world. It's not bound to a wall. It's not bound. You have to deal with it physically. And so the way that projection of active performances of Josh moving through these spaces and then seeing people respectfully observe really moved me. That's what thrust me back into your experience as a voracious learner, as a perpetually curious person. And like this, it's shown up, you are curious and you invite others to be curious and not to be satisfied with simple answers. Your criticality and your willingness to explore phenomenon has, some of you probably already know this, she's an educator and she produced a whole pedagogical platform called Cassandra Press. And yeah. So to see the performance space, so when I see those performances, I see happenings. I see like what I learned about new genres, what I learned about like, formally considered performance art when I got to art school. And I see a balm for my paranoid soul about what happens when there's contemporary lack of access to art education. It was already hard enough to get it in the first place. And now, SFAI, the oldest art school west of the Mississippi River, is closed. PAFA no longer confers degrees in Philadelphia. UArt's closed and students and faculty found out the day of. MICA actually was an oasis school for those people who were stuck in limbo, actually. So, what happens, and so that presentation, that sculptural presentation affirms to me that for you, the practice of learning outside of spaces that were actually always hostile toward us in the first damn place is always happening. And it shows up in the performance work because it's collaboration with the artists that you're working with who you're building these tender relationships with that are sometimes fraught. But I'm also seeing it in what you're teaching the audience how to see. You're teaching the audience how to watch a performance, and that's not necessarily, that literally won't continue. It's a legacy practice, like printmaking. It has to be passed on. It has to be taught through action. It has to be modeled. So your work is showing up sculpturally. It shows up intimately in your occupation, your compulsion to collage. But then it also shows up pedagogically and methodologically as a very generous educator and facilitator of space for others. So brava.
Thank you. That's sweet. Definitely, I feel like the accumulation process has been so intense. Like the process of accumulation and reading and yeah, that's definitely been a process.
Ooh.
Yeah, back to Albers.
Mm-hmm. Back to you, homie. Back to you. So the plants. The plants. You said earlier, I am plucked like a flower from a garden, and placed onto a pedestal. Can you say as much as you feel comfortable saying about the origins of the plants and how they became enmeshed with physical bodies?
I mean, it's funny because like we were talking about with the plants actually came first. So in terms of like a surface, I still think they're the funniest. There's points of comedy in a lot of the video lately, and I'm definitely interested in comedy and taking comedy forward. But the plants make me laugh, and like, sometimes they make me laugh. They came out of making me cry, but now I'm really tickled when I see them somehow in all their strangeness. Like they're found images, and they're images that I found dealing with men who were fetishists, essentially. So they came out of almost interview processes where my body was highly at stake, where my nervous system and my immune system were constantly being, plucked is one word, right? But like, just weeded, you know what I mean? Like raked. And so a lot of it was about teaching myself how to see other Black women in intimate space, in their own kind of embodied intimacy, and figuring out what, especially I think this like a fascination for many years in terms of self-determinism has been, and a really deep question of where we are coerced, where we're made compliant, is around reproductive justice. The reality of child rearing, the reality of forced comp hetero relationships that's always been a really, that's a place where I'm constantly growing, where I'm constantly learning, but also that's a place where in relation, we're matter, we're water, you know what I mean? We're shifting constantly around this. And so I think in terms of my own desire, how I see my body in relation to bodies that desire my body, it was really hard. It's still really hard to look at Black porn. And in 2016, I think there was a moment where I'm so grateful for like people like Patrisse Cullors and Black Lives Matter, not necessarily because of all the political activity, let's say, that happened around the BLM movement, but because of the philosophical demand, the phenomenological demand that it placed on viewing, and also on people to use trauma-aware language when they talk to and about Blackness. And this really intense interpersonal demand to respect Black people that took everybody by storm. You know what I mean? Everybody's like, what do you mean? Like, how can we ever? And now they're tired. A couple years later, they're too tired to, right? There was a stupor, there's a fatigue when there's like a command for respect. And at a base level, that shook me, that shook the whole practice, right? Like that the water of those seams come into every aspect of Black studies. And this is how Black studies is every other discipline, right? Is ethnography, is anthropology, is economics, is finance,
Architecture, geography,
all
archaeology.
of it. Science, the science fictions of race, the race fictions of science. Like, so when I'm training myself to look at myself kinder, when I'm training myself to look at myself with grace, when I'm training myself to look at myself with desire, I have to use other Black women in a weird way. Or I need other Black women and their space, the space of them, the relation of them. And I think that was such a private thing for so long. And in 2016, it was like, no, actually, if it's gonna matter, if I'm gonna matter, I have to confront this. And so a lot of the surfaces, I still look at these surfaces and I'm like, girl, you were going through it. Like, I didn't know if I wanted to show faces. I didn't know if I wanted to show eyes. I ended up cutting eyes out. I didn't know if I wanted to show vaginas. I ended up cutting vaginas out. I didn't know if I needed legs. I didn't know if they were legs. I didn't know if they were lips. I didn't know if they were open mouths. I didn't know if they were planning, if they were potted. I didn't know if they were in toxic soil. I didn't know if they were invasive. I didn't know if they were exotic. I didn't know where they were intruding. I didn't know where the vines would end up in my house. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes those vines lived under the bed for a while. You know what I mean? Because I would make them and not be able to see them. And so that was a process of looking where I had to turn that in on myself, right? Or I had to ask myself, how am I looking? How am I looking at the gray economies that trap so many of our bodies in Mammy Jezebel Sapphire, in that phenomenology of color, right? Into spectrums of colorism in our own families, into hierarchies at work, in privilege within our, workspaces. Like, how is colorism at play there, right? Like, so for me, that question of the pornographic, of the exotic, of the erotic, of the invasive is extremely philosophical and extremely visceral at the same time. And especially because so many of the demands for self-determinism collapse around the two identities of blackness, a black woman, especially like every aspect of the feminine, right? And especially, I want to really intentionally bring our trans friends, our trans sisters into this conversation, right? Like, because that feminine is highly flammable. It is extremely flammable. It's very threatening, right? It's the edge of the garden. It's a really intense space that needs constant pruning, right? Where everybody feels like that's their pleasure garden. We've become in so many ways earthly delights, right? And that being plucked and constantly plucked and preened, and it starts in our homes, it ends up in the public space, in the garden. And so the the plants are formally, I think, needing to see and ask people what they feel when they dance. It's a very similar thing I'm asking myself, and I'm using the erotic to trigger, I think, a lot of those phenomenologies in me. And then the plants are a really intense way of taking notes, I think, on that process.
That's so funny because you are flying, and I'm looking at our time, but we started a little late, so we're gonna take a little bit more time and then pause for people to finish their thoughts and pass them up to the ushers when they come around. But you are flying. So this is the way that I saw this work. Thankfully, at 52 Walker, were the dance collages and the sculpture, the plant sculptures in the space together. And I did not know, first, of course, when I walked in first, I just started dancing around the space because I was so happy. I'm like, it just feels so good. And then when I slowed down and, stayed with the work, with the plants, and started paying attention to their veins, their tender leaves, their outfolding nature, and then I realized I was looking at people, disembodied Black people, and then on the walls, the two-dimensional works, bound by a structure, embedded into architecture, are these notes, handwritten notes, and thoughts about movement. So we go from this betrayal. We go from betrayal as the spark that moves you as the actor. And then the sculptural works are made compulsively, self-soothing is happening, and the work is made and it hides under the bed and it's not for anyone to see. And you know this because you're an educator now. When I get to work with people in facilitated space for visual art and humanities focus, I always try to encourage people to make for no one to see. And
those works aren't for sale, also, just so you know. They've never been for sale, and they won't be for sale. Yeah,
but these are so they're so tender and magnificent, and to learn over the years about how they feel tender because they were tender. They were your it's like they were your journal, and they hid under the bed, and they weren't for anyone else to see until you were ready. And then it feels like the framed works are like pages out of your notebook as you're continuing to consider, like, what is the power of movement? What is the reclamation of movement? What is the discipline of movement?
And pose also.
Yeah.
I think especially in the plants, I think a lot about
pose.
Oh
my God. I mean, look at this.
Yeah. It's fun. It's interesting with the dancers, right? Because they are so, and it's funny where affect tricks us, and I think where moralization and moral relativism tricks us. Like so much of the time, I think about especially with dancers, like how can I place them in front of people? Like, what archive do they have to protect themselves? You know what I mean? How trained, like what does their training give them in terms of like bringing the things that I want to bring forward in the dance, which are heavy topics often. So like, you know, with Damond, for instance, who's in these plants, his body is extremely muscular. He told me a lot about working through ballet and working through those forms within himself. And so, you know, very different, right, than the plants. And I think I started making the plants in 2014, actually. Didn't show them until probably 2016. And then these plants are from 2021. And by the time I got to this, like it was just such a different, you know, there's such a different architecture there, right? Like I was super in this process of bringing him and the plant into a space where they could meld, you know, like, and even surface wise, like I think about these, I mean, it's stickers, you know what I mean? It's fucking stickers. But yeah, you know, like it feels really, it's so nice I think of it now in terms of seeing everything all together. And like with those early plants, especially with the erotic plants, it was so much about being able to peel, like you're saying, disembody, because I was so disembodied. But then I think a lot of the way that Damond organizes his body and has organized his body in space really pushed the limits of that botanical fractal. It gave me that botanical fractal kind of feeling, you know what I mean? Where I was like, oh, I can hold you in this plant, actually. You know what I mean? I can hold all of you in this plant. Every leaf can be, you know. And
just as shiny as if he were all greased up by his mom on a Sunday.
Came in shiny, girl. Mm-hmm. Came to the studio shiny. So it was like, just smelled nice. You know what I mean? So I'm like, it's like beautiful, you know, like I can, and it was so great because I could hold, not that I don't find beauty in the erotica, but like, you know, like I felt the plant could hold all of these parts, you know, and that there were no sums, there were no negatives, there were no imbalances in this kind of plant work.
You know what it reminds me of? How plants clean dirty air and clean dirty soil. It sounds like the whole evolution of those sculptures as a need, and then into this exploration of beauty, and then like a renewed interaction, and you have the compulsion. You always have this compulsion to invite people in. You're so sweet, but you know, like, you know, because you went from like closed off, right? So when we were in school, Kandis used to host these parties, these like get-togethers at her apartment, and she would make all this food for everybody, and we were all so broken, so hungry. And luckily, at one point, me and my friends, Eric Mack, me, Nia, we all lived a number of blocks away, and we would walk there excited for all of this food. You invite people in, and so it's beautiful that the plants, if we could just go back to them one last time, then we got to go to Thelma, because we're going to culminate in the death of A. But back to, so like the beauty of their, arrangement. I thought they were real when I first encountered them, and then I realized that they weren't real. It took me a while to get to the fact that I was looking at pieces of shiny bodies. But to hear the process affirms that at this point, you are returning to the sunlight of the spirit, you know, having been like driven into the soil by the darkness of betrayal. And your practice emerges anew. It's like it was a betrayal of your body as we're living in a meta environment of the constant promise actually of the betrayal of our humanity.
It's a promise.
It's a promise, yeah.
So that's the hypervigilance though too,
right.
and the accumulation of signs and the interest in choreography. You know, like I think it's so important to really hold that you know, BLM imperative, that Black Lives Matter imperative in a therapeutic space and in a therapeutic model, because we're trained so much aesthetically out of having that vulnerability.
Yeah.
But yeah, hypervigilance and that kind of uncanny hypervigilance, I think, produces a lot of practices that are weighted and grounded in accumulation, especially from Black women, right? Because we're constantly losing. So where do you hoard? Where do you hide stuff? Where do you keep stuff safe? What is now I'm thinking a lot about banks, you know, and accounting and emotional ledgers.
Speaking of, how what do you want to leave all of us with about these titles? I know we were trying to move forward, but the titles are so dense and become a part of the composition itself. What sort of ledger do the titles provide? for your accounting?
The ledgers are also bibliography. I think that's the easiest way to sort of formally tie them to things. They're parts of songs. They're my intrusive thoughts. Like, you know, like when you read something, I have this thing I love reading, but I have this thing all the time where I'm like, and it shouldn't even anymore. This is just the curiosity thing, but reading blows my mind. You know what I mean? Like sometimes when people like the words don't come so easy all the time, right? But and especially on those hard things, and like there's definitely texts where I'm like, what? like this is crazy. So I remember those things. I write those things down. Sometimes there's like 10 open books. You know what I mean? In the house, and so a lot of the text is that it's like if I could be writing an essay or something with each work, then these would be a lot of the bibliographies. And I go back and forth with also how to credit the authors of the words and whether or not that's important. Like triadic, you know, like I've been asked before, like should you mention that the triadic ballet is, you know, belongs to Oscar Schlemmer? And I'm like, no, because I wouldn't. If I quoted a Lana Del Rey song, be like, that's Lana. I wouldn't. I wouldn't, you know. So.
Tell us about Thelma. What are the origin? How did you meet Thelma, and what was her expertise, and what was the directorial experience like?
So Thelma has a really amazing archive, right? She's Afro-German. She's working in theater. We met in a theater in Switzerland, actually. And what's amazing with Thelma is one of the first works of hers that she showed me is she has a YouTube series you guys should check out called Go Tell My Horse, or Don't Tell My Horse. And it's a kind of German saying that's like, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, tell me nothing from the horse. Sag mir nicht von deinem Head. Yeah, and I always, whenever I see it, or she calls him, like, the theme is kind of like, Thelma, boo, bang. Tell me nothing from the horse. I don't know, so every time she calls him like Thelma. Anyway, so that's how I met Thelma. She's also an Aries queen. Like we have so many things in common. We got angry at the same things, I think. And that is for me always a soul tie. And yeah, so working with Thelma and being like, I was a dramaturg while she was a principal actor who was being moved around different ensembles. And so I had this really amazing reflective time with her where, you know, I got to hear her thoughts on cast as certain characters from classical characters to more contemporary characters. So with this piece, especially a monologue, it's a casting, you know what I mean? It's an improv. It's improv, but it's not, you know, like we're going back and forth on things that basically really happened, you know what I mean? Like that basically are like, and also, you know, movies that like composites of movies that are actually out there, right? Like I think of, you know, the second scene in, so this is a monologue and it's 3 sections. The first act is going through it. The second act is Working Girl Color Theory. And the third act is Diane Belinda. And so in the second act, there's a scene where, you know, the casting agent is like, so you're playing an alien who's a sexy alien commander queen who doesn't have a boyfriend. Go, you know, and like, and it's like, yeah, and she's had, you know, this is the Zoe Saldana, the color theory, right, of the black woman who is who can, if there's a black woman, she can represent alien, right? She can represent other in monstrous forms. She can be green, she can be purple, she can be, you know, this avatar of, so, you know, so many of these color theories. And so thinking about Thelma in that way too, I mean, when I first met Thelma, that's what we talked about, right? Like how far do they stretch these roles? It's like you're a single mother, there's a zombie outbreak, you have 1 bullet, you know, like, and you're like, oh, really? You know, and then it's like, and you're in Prada, so, and it's like, okay, great. So a lot of this monologue is really, and Thelma's, tell me nothing from the horse is Thelma going through. She has 4 archetypes, I think 4 or 5 archetypes of black German women, Afro-German women that she molds and that she, you know, has this kind of cabaret of the performance of. So she does a live show, a stand-up show, where she moves through a hyper-religious, like first generation African grandmother figure of Gladys, who's very conservative, she moves through, you know, younger Vivian, who's like a younger sort of like sexy, more into Afro-American hip hop, Afro-German woman. So what I love about that practice, and what I really loved about that practice was it's so German expressionist, it's so German expressionist, you know, like it's high cabaret. It's really high cabaret. It's a one-woman show that comes so much out of the American tradition. and yeah, so I felt, you know, super okay with being like, let's cartwheel around. How do you embody? How do you reject? You know, and so she has, because she's very comfortable with, like, I think the radicality of so many different gestures of personhood or personality. I had a lot of space, you know. I knew I wasn't going to shake Thelma in any of the, you know, kind of processes of that. So it was really amazing seeing her respond so comedically, and the timing and the, you know, the banter that we got to push. And yeah, and I think we broke through I think, again, all these walls, but I think we broke through a lot of fourth, fifth walls together with this work.
It's extraordinary. And seeing it again today before we came in, we have to wrap up. We see people leaving, we're losing people. So we're gonna wrap it up. We're gonna end with the death of A, because we have to find out about Jared Haynes. But I just wanted to say this
also,
about
shout out to Shiban Yanwu, who played Medusa. Fab.
Exactly.
That's also Thelma.
That's Thelma?
Who plays Cheyenne?
I was like, you had another actor that you didn't tell me about. I did not realize that was
we
Thelma.
painted this side of her face and her hand white. Oh my gosh, you could kind of see around the thumb.
That is hilarious.
Oh, we just stuck this wig on her.
So collage shows up throughout the show. This part is really important. Myth, media, and the monstrous other. Monsters, the monsters that white people make up to kill us all. And it has to be reproduced for us to believe it. But projection and the presentation of the two Thelmas. And I want to acknowledge that the last work of yours that I remember when we were in school, your senior show at Cooper Union, I've lost a lot of images, a lot of hard drives since then. So I couldn't contribute this to the slideshow, but I remember it as if it were yesterday. Thanks, Mom, in block letters in glitter, directly onto the wall of the gallery. And then she was just like not there. And I was like, wow, bold. Because you know you have to deinstall. When you're sharing space with other people at a school and it's thesis time, it's senior show time, you have like a week for that show to be up. Those walls got to be clean for the next people. I was like, wow, Kandis. She was like, bye. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, none of you. Thank you. But there are moments in the other work that's inspired by that French film where the close-up, say again?
L'Enfer, the
Thank
Romy
you.
Schneider.
I study Spanish, so I'm not going to say that right. But there are the composition. So we're maturing through your practice, and the composition zeroed in the horizontal, zeroed in onto Thelma's face as it pulls back, with the swirling lights around her, glittering her face as if it were a disco ball. I remembered that, and I was like, wow, there it is.
Glitter.
That's right. Thanks, Mom. There it is. You know, the glittering black woman to whom gratitude is owed, is right there in the space. So we're going to move to Jared Haynes and the death of A, because I just have these steady questions. How did you meet this actor?
Too, though, real quick.
Yeah.
I'm going to be publishing a book called Whiteness, Dissonance, and Horror on the necropolitical, like, assemblages of horror in the Trump years with Sternberg Press this November.
That's my girl. That's my
So
girl.
stay tuned.
So your last actor in this most recent work, as we have like matured through your language of color theory, through a shared language and intimate language of color theory, that's the Blackout. How did you meet this actor? And what is his expertise? And what was that directorial experience like? And with that, we will be done, I promise.
So Jared I met through Michael Sherman, actually, who has a production company in Los Angeles and was a super supporter of the work. Yeah.
Hey, Sherm.
Hey, Sherm. Yeah, wherever Sherm is. Thank you.
He'll watch this eventually.
Shout out to Sherm, but also Baltimorean.
That's right.
Yep. So I met Gerard that way, and it was, I mean, also, again, just very fast soul tie, I think, to a person that's as... Jared is also a director in his own right. He has a documentary on Black fatherhood coming out. Jared is one of the standout experiences of working with a performer for me, because he had the desire to sharpen, you know? He had the desire to sharpen. He didn't want to just perform. He was like, how can I do this better? How, is this what you want? You know, like I feel like rarely I get to a place where I feel so comfortable, tricking someone. I guess that's weird to say, right? But a lot of his extreme organization and extreme competence. You know what I mean? I feel like we developed this language together. I gave Jared so many different monologues. So for about a month, and there's a whole work that was supposed to be, that we, rented a theater and everything, like shot in performance space in New York, 3-day shoot. None of that is in the final. Not, I think maybe 2 minutes from the very beginning of that is in the final, where I had him doing Richard Pryor stand-up, monologues from Jaws, monologues from Apocalypse Now, dash cam rereadings, old commercial jingles. You know what I mean? Like I had him doing W.E. Du Bois speeches that there are no record of. I had him doing Malcolm X to Stokely Carmichael to. So we really got into like, what is this figure that is the concave or converse of the Willy Loman that shows up in the Black modernist, the Black mid-century modern caricature, right? The Black father, the Black preacher. Those kind of like high modernist tropes for Black masculinity that come out of World War II, especially the super soldier, the bad father, right? The everyman's father, the paternalistic preacher. So we went through so many of these monologues, trying to really create a language around them so that we could subvert them and not just reiterate them or string them together. And then also we used a lot of the Loman language and a lot of the Miller language to produce that chasm between like someone who knows what's going on and someone who's flooding through previous or past emotions, gestures. Trauma, right? But I mean, in Willy Loman's case, it's interesting because his underdogness is framed in the trauma of others. So I pulled from the first moment, and I didn't let Jared see this until the day of shooting. The second time, right? Because the first time, it was just too good, or it was clean. And I don't know, something. It was very moving, and I watch it still like privately. But I needed something a little bit crazier. I needed something a little bit like rawer. And so I pulled all of the moments from the Miller where he talks about other marginal bodies and their struggles, right? Like the projects that are being demolished, the coolie labor that he didn't I work so harder than a coolie. So he's talking a lot about these social political realities in which he is not in any way disadvantaged participant of. And we pulled those, right? And so there's a lot in this in Death of A that I feel like Jared carries, so superbly into like this interaction of that kind of like convex mirror of the Willy Loman and the Black working class masculinity of modernity, of like a kind of iterations that I think we still see so much today. Many actors today have to sort of train, I think, in these roles, fences, these August Wilson roles. So I'm thinking about that a lot with Death of A, and I feel like that mid-century masculinity somehow. I'm calling it mid-century masculinity. I hope y'all know what that means. I'm not quite sure, but Jared really he helped shape. He really shaped and unshaped that Loman character. And then I have to shout out also the sound design for The Voice, who is Markeisha Nicole Smith, and she Juilliard trained voice singer, actually. I think she's a soprano. And I had her all the way flat. I was like, I need you to be flat, flat, flat. Linda, she reads Linda, and Linda is represented on this second reel. Whenever Linda is speaking, it's just archival images of African American women performing domesticity. And so again, she has the Linda voice, right? She has the words of Miller's Linda, but what we see on screen are all of these mid-century, especially high kind of Hollywood mid-century moments of African American feminine domesticity, in and out of the reel. So in film work, and then also in the political reel. So we see by the end we have Horton Spillers, we have Michelle Alexander, we have these Black women academics who are also performing and unpacking the images that preceded them were. And so I really love that Linda. I love the Linda reel. I think it's very dear to my heart. If I separately edit all these screens. So the Linda reel as a character is like a moving collage that I dream of sometimes, I think. the way that she recorded, the flatness that she recorded, and then we stacked, I think, 4 straight run-throughs of the same monologues on top, or the same lines on top of each other. So she almost sounds robotic and AI, and I think, again, about that, almost the algorithmic prediction of the anticipation of violence in that performance as well. And I feel like we really sculpted something in that sound is somehow super interesting for me. So I hope y'all get to pay attention to that, to the Lindo track as well.
The way that the images play together affirms something that Loman says at the beginning. He says, when we deny the evil in ourselves, we dehumanize ourselves. And can you go to the next slide? Actually, never mind. Go back to the other slide. We can't see it here. You're going to have to go experience it. You're going to have to come back. And if y'all are locals, you're lucky because you get to come back and come back and come back and support this institution and see this work and live in this work. You're so lucky. But when I got to spend time in that piece, the dropping of bombs, the blast, the notation of blast radius, the anticipation of, the mythic other. So the way that all of these screens are collaged together as this very human, familial experience of disappointment and hope and grief is happening in these other squares, interaction of color is happening all over. That anticipation of violence, and it made me think
family.
It's a family. But I thought, thought this about the work, that the work is fearless in its addressing and touching and handling of evil throughout. And it made me afraid to talk about it tonight, actually, because it is just, it's so, I didn't think I could get through this without weeping. But there's so much power. So thanks, pal. So the reclamation, as we go into the big room with the notation of movement, the power of movement, the reclamation of self, the reclamation of beauty, everything that you've shared with us tonight, the turning inward to turn back outward with a gaze that is kind, that is loving, and that is affirming, and not seeking an outside gaze to give that, but the gaze shines from within. The entire work is an absolute triumph, Kandis. It's an absolute triumph. It's an absolute triumph. All right, so we're over, but I think it's okay because I'm not getting like a big candy cane. Okay. So we need those questions. Do we have a runner to gather them? Yeah. Okay. All right. That's right. Stand up for thine self.
Also, shout out in the catalog to the reader, Muriel Miller Young.
Just as many as can come forward.
If
you can pass them down to the
edge.
Reader,
there's Muriel Miller Young.
They're getting collected right now.
Essay.
Here's one.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, our person is coming. Bye, y'all. TTFN. Ta-ta for now.
There's a Muriel Miller Young essay called Interventions, the Deviant and Defiant Art of Black Women Porn Directors.
Yeah.
And it's on page 241 of the Reader in the catalog. I highly recommend.
So I thought about, the methodology of prompting responsive performance that begins with your very human experience and goes along into all these relationships with other performers. And then I thought about, collage as projection. Collage as disciplinary reclamation of self and of power. Collage as a generous bibliography. Collage as pedagogy. Those are all hints for y'all, as she's saying that, that Linda reel is close to your heart because it's a part of this bibliography that spans the entirety of the presentation. There are notes everywhere. There's generosity everywhere. I feel like you all should take opportunities to take these hints and start reading groups together to circle up. We are what we got. And if we don't know that now, I'm not sure when we're going to know it. So, the work is an act of the humanities on site here in this community right now. So if you sit in the room with the Thelma pieces with a crew, if you have 4 people, if you're sitting at my back and someone else is sitting at someone else's back with notes, active note taking, you can get down as many as possible the names of the books. The work is interactive. It's not, you are not, it's incredibly personal, but this is a shared experience of having to reconsider what value means for oneself in a world that it is hyper compulsively devaluing us. or you,
Pathological.
or the notion of community. So we want to encourage you to use the show. You have a perfect show here. You should use it as the tool of education, re-education, inside these walls and outside of these walls that is presenting to you. It's a gift. All right, so you have that one. You want to read that? So thanks, y'all, who contributed. Sorry, well, this is for you to choose. And stay out of it. This is yours. And we thank you for your patience, and we know that everybody went through a lot of traffic to get here, which is why we decided to start a little bit later.
I really like the idea too of them being answered on social media after this. That's so nice.
Shout out to Nia K. Evans. That was her idea.
I can't read all of them like directly, so I'm just gonna go with the ones that have the best handwriting.
See? Don't let those people convince you that learning cursive and penmanship is no longer valuable.
They made a cover.
Don't let those people convince you don't need to know how to write.
Language as a gateway, language as a barrier. Beautiful. How to talk about art in a way that is both mind-opening, revelatory, but is not generating exclusivity.
Thank you. Who did that come from? Oh, thank you.
How to talk about art in a way that is both mind-opening, revelatory, but is not generating exclusivity. I think authentically, from where you are. And it's funny, whenever you talk about things from where you are, someone will be there. I think. Another good handwrite. I like this person's because they were like, actually, wait, in pencil. Okay. Why did you stop creating art after school? How did you feel like your art changed over this hiatus? Who's this?
Who that is? Are they gone?
Maybe they left.
Oh, back there.
Okay.
Hi.
Why did I stopped because I hit an event horizon where I was like, okay, there are no arguments actually for that. Like we've been talking a lot about this, right? Like I was really sick of seeing intelligence, of seeing racism and misogyny, classism and phobias being praised as intelligence or sites of knowledge. And after art school, I was like, okay, this is event horizon for this, like. And especially, I mean, we went to art school. Nobody was woke. You know what I mean? We went to art school with skinny jeans. It was Paris Hilton. It was the birth of the darkest CIA psyops of reality television. Only Don Julio's by Popeyes compares, right, to 2004. It was nuts. Like, it was not cute. You know, like some of those first sculpture critiques, there wasn't even a conversation around Black excellence. It was like if you weren't virtuosic and down to be like perceived constantly through whatever matrix of desire was pressed on you, you did not deserve that space, right? And it was about making room for the people who were starving themselves, killing themselves, breaking, you know what I mean? And I've always been too punk for my own good. So it was big fuck you after Cooper. You know, I don't think I even went to my own graduation.
I'm saying.
Yeah, like.
She's in glitter. She said, thanks, Mom, and did not show up to the opening. Well done.
So I was out. And what I learned during that hiatus was that I am an artist. And that's the only identity that I have. Mm-hmm. That's it.
I guess that's the mic. Thank you. Thank you, Kandis.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.